Norm, it's Jeff Sass again. I know we just finished recording I Know This Guy, your great podcast, and I feel terrible. At the end there, when I had to tell you I know this guy, I mentioned my friend C.C. Chapman, and I blanked out on the name of his books, and I feel terrible. So I just wanted to make sure you knew. He wrote 2 great books. His first book was Amazing Things Will Happen, which is a wonderful book, and he also is the co-author of Content Rules, and he co-wrote that with Ann Handley. So those are CC's books. I know this guy. You should talk to him. Thanks again for having me on the show. Take care, Norm.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of I Know This Guy, the podcast where we dive deep into the lives of some of the most interesting people I know. Before we get started, please like and subscribe to I Know This Guy wherever you get your podcasts. By the way, my kids want me to say something about ringing a bell. What the hell's a bell?
All right, Dad, who do we have on the podcast today?
We have a buddy of mine, Jeff Sass. He's an interesting guy. As a matter of fact, I would call him a branding genius. He's also an author of Everything I Know About Business and Marketing I Learned from the Toxic Avenger. Now, do you remember the Toxic Avenger?
Not at all.
I didn't think so. It was a cult movie back in the day, and he was actually part of it. He worked for the company, and anyways, I'm going to let him tell his story, but it's way more than just talking about the Toxic Avenger. This guy knows his stuff.
All right, awesome. Well, let's dig into this.
You know, we've been talking for a while. We've actually known each other for some time. We've actually been on stage together.
Absolutely. There's a quick funny story about that, if you don't mind me just jumping in, because you just reminded me. So when we were on stage together, standing side by side, I had set up my video camera to record the session because I wasn't sure if the conference was going to be recording it. And of course, I set it all up before you got on stage. So I used myself as the dummy to set up the camera and make sure that I was in frame and everything. And then we went back, and then I hit record, and then you and I get on stage. And then when I looked at the recording afterwards, basically it's me and you up to your neck because you're considerably taller than me. And so it's a pretty much useless record of a wonderful presentation we gave together because I basically cut you off at the neck. I decapitated you on video.
Well, that wasn't the first time, but most of the time it's intentional. But so, Jeff, you know, the whole premise for this podcast is interesting people, and we've had many a night sitting down, well, having a cigar, talking, and you have got to be one of the more interesting people that I know. So I just want to, dig back a little bit and talk a bit about your backstory and, what makes Jeff Jeff.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for saying that. I'm sure it's not nearly true. My reputation exceeds myself for sure. But yeah, so I'm, a past middle-aged guy. So I've been around the block a few times. I'm 61 years old, and I've had a really fun and very varied career and life that really just ties into the things that always interested me as a child, and I've managed to fulfill them in various ways in various industries along the way. And that's really just, I love to be creative. I like to perform. As a kid, I was in a child theater group when I was 10 years old, and I played the lion in The Wizard of Oz. And I can even to this day do a very good rendition of King of the Forest, which I would often do to charm or scare my children when they were young. I grew up in Queens, New York, at a time that was very special. Really, I was a kid through the 60s and had a very fun and enjoyable childhood as I look back on it. And went to college, studied. I thought I was going to college to be a biology major in pre-med, and then realized very quickly that that's not where, although I liked biology, it's not really what I wanted to do. And I ended up switching to become an English theater and creative writing major. And that's really what I studied. And right out of college, which was Cornell University, right out of college, I went to work for a small production and distribution company in New York called Satori Entertainment. And I really wanted to be in the entertainment industry, and this was a great opportunity. We were more in the distribution side than the production side. And at the time, in the early 80s, we became the leading importer of English language foreign films. So films from Australia, New Zealand, and Great Britain. And it was a lot of fun. I got to travel quite a bit when I was very young, going to London and going to the Cannes Film Festival every year and traveling to Australia and other places for the purpose of finding these films for us to import into the US. From that business, I went to work for myself for a period of time and had an independent production company and did a clay animated live action special around the 100th anniversary of the Statue of Liberty called My Friend Liberty. Back in 1987 when the Statue of Liberty turned 100 years old. And then eventually went to work for Troma, the independent film company known for such very deep and meaningful fare as the Toxic Avenger and Class of Nukem High, and actually spent 7.5 years working for Troma, wrote a book about it, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And then my career has always been one in my kind of life philosophy has always been kind of go with the flow. So I've never had a master plan, although I've known the things I like. But as opportunities presented themselves to me, I generally kind of went with them and then always managed to work the things I liked into those opportunities.
I want to know about being on set with the Toxic Avenger. What was what was it like? I mean, I remember the Toxic Avenger, and I think most people my age do. I mean, it was a cult film. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when I went to work for Troma, which was I was there from 1987 to 1994, and so the original Toxic Avenger was done before I joined Troma, so that was already in the can and had been released. And in fact, in my book, there's a chapter about how the very first time I visited Lloyd and Michael, the founders of Troma, at the Troma building in New York, they were actually editing the trailer for the Toxic Avenger, and I actually, as a visitor to their office for the first time meeting them, actually reviewed the trailer with them. Lloyd asked me what I liked. I didn't really like the direction it was going in the tagline and said, well, what would you say? And I came up with the tagline on the spot, the first superhero from New Jersey, which ended up being the tagline that they used for the Toxic Avenger to this day. But I worked very intimately on Toxic Avenger Part 2 and Toxic Avenger Part 3. Which were both shot at the same time, actually. And then I also was very instrumental in the creation of the Toxic Crusaders, which was the animated cartoon spin-off of the Toxic Avenger, which is probably one of the miracles of my career when you think that we were able to take a character from an R-rated, bloody, gory, disgusting, campy, cheap, tasteless, great movie, The Toxic Avenger, and turn that crazy character into a children's show, into a Saturday morning cartoon for kids. So that was pretty remarkable and a great experience. Yeah.
Oh man. And okay, you were in it.
Yeah, like Alfred Hitchcock before me, I tried to have a cameo in pretty much every movie, every Troma movie that I was involved with. So yes, I have a brief appearance in the Toxic Avenger 2 and 3, and in Sergeant Kabuki Man and other movies that I've worked on.
I am going to search for that clip, and if I can, I'll insert it into this podcast.
Yeah, I think in the Toxic movies, I don't think I had a speaking role, but I do have a cameo appearance. But in Kabuki Man, which I also co-wrote with Lloyd Kaufman, Troma president, I do have a short speaking role. I play a doctor in a scene there, which is pretty funny.
Oh, that's cool. I just wanted to go back because I know I've heard you talk about the Toxic Avenger, and yeah, I didn't want you to skip by that too quickly.
Well, actually, now that you bring it up, and since you said we can go all over the place with this,
Sure.
I had two speaking roles in Kabuki Man. So one was as the role of the doctor and had a speaking role in a scene in the hospital, but I also did the voice of the monkey, and literally I'm credited in the end credits for the voice of the monkey. In the story of Kabuki Man, there is a monkey as a part of the story and appears in a number of scenes and speaks in a monkey voice, and I did the voice of the monkey. Now, why that is particularly significant today is to have a monkey in the film, we had to have an animal wrangler. And in the script for Kabuki Man, we had a monkey, we had a tiger, and we had a lion, and it was all tied into this mystical plot of the story where the jaguar and the tiger and the monkey come together, blah blah blah. So we had to find an animal wrangler who could provide those animals and have them on the set and manage them. And the person that we hired, and the tiger and the monkey and the lion that we used, belonged to Doc Antle. Doc
Get
Antle,
out.
who is now world famous thanks to Tiger King on Netflix. So he was one of the leading storylines of that show. Doc and his entourage of nubile young women. Quite a long time ago, we hired Doc, and at the time he had long hair and was kind of a hippie, kind of a good-looking hippie, almost like a character out of Godspell or Jesus Christ Superstar on Broadway. That's kind of how he looked, and he had his entourage and his animals. And I remember Lloyd and I driving up to, at the time, his farm was in upstate New York, and we drove up there, and it was such a bizarre experience. It was kind of like a trailer park slash junkyard with wild animals all over the place, from zebras to elephants to lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. But we hired Doc, and he actually appears in the film. So if you watch Kabuki Man, Sergeant Kabuki Man NYPD, and there's some scenes that were shot along the Hudson River in Hoboken, New Jersey, where there's a tiger in a cage, and the handler of the tiger in the cage, as the tiger gets out and attacks a woman, is Doc Antle himself. And the woman he attacks is one of Doc's entourage, wearing a wig to match the look of the actress she's portraying.
So the camp, was the camp really as crazy as it's shown on TV with the beautiful women?
Again, it was a different location because they had,
Yeah.
back then it was in upstate New York, and they had subsequently moved. They've moved more than once to the zoo they're in now. But yeah, it was wild because it was a big property, lots of acreage. There was, I remember, kind of a house, one kind of main house, almost like you'd expect like a farmhouse on a big property. But then as you went along the property, it was more like a junkyard than a zoo. There were kind of trailers and piles and the odd cage here and there, and it was a very interesting experience. But we got the animals we needed and the people to manage them, and for a low budget, Troma film, it certainly added to the production value to have all these crazy animals in the film, and Doc and his crew made it happen.
Oh, that's great. Now, the Lion King, Simba didn't show up, did he? No, the Tiger King didn't show up, did he?
No. And it was so funny because, I heard about Tiger King when it was first bubbling over, during everyone staying at home. And I wasn't paying attention. And I was on a Zoom call with a group of people. It was probably a business call. And someone mentioned it. And they mentioned Doc Antle. And it's like my mind was blown. I said, Doc Antle? Because I hadn't watched The Tiger King yet. I had just heard about it. And then this person said, oh, yeah, Doc Antle is like a big part of it. So then I had to immediately watch it. And that was pretty funny.
Oh, so, okay. So let's take it next step. Now we've gone from Doc Antle. What next?
Yeah. What next? So when we launched the Toxic Crusaders, when we successfully turned Toxie into this children's character, we got involved in licensing and merchandising because at the time, and this was 1989, 1990, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were peaking, and a lot of people in that industry felt like the Toxic Crusaders, because they were a little bit edgy, just like the Ninja Turtles, that they could become the next Ninja Turtles. So we were being wined and dined by all the licensing and merchandising folks who wanted to get the rights to do toys and games and everything to do with Toxic Crusaders. And we ended up, again, a lot of this is in my book. I ended up, after being pitched by pretty much every licensing agent in the industry and all of them wanting to keep their third of the profits or third of the revenue, I went to Lloyd and Michael and said, look, this can't be rocket science. We've got the property, why give away a third? Let's just do it ourselves. I'll do it, right? So we set up Troma Licensing, and I just dove into the licensing and merchandising world. And we ended up doing about 70 licenses for Toxic Crusaders products worldwide, everything from pajamas to coloring books to toys and games, and also video games. So in the process, we did a deal with Sega and Nintendo. And Nintendo, we did a Game Boy game. If you remember the Nintendo Game Boy, the handheld game device, we did a Game Boy game for Toxic Crusaders. And in dealing with these companies, I became really interested in that interaction of traditional entertainment with interactive entertainment. And then one of the other bizarre and amazing things we did was, while we were doing licensing for Toxic Crusaders, we were kind of the new kid, the new kid on the block, and we were in demand because there were high expectations for Toxie and Toxic Crusaders. So we had great relationships with all these manufacturers. And once we had those relationships, we realized, well, we could handle more properties than just the Toxic Crusaders. So why don't we seek out other good properties that are looking for licensing deals? And we have all these relationships now, and we could present these other properties to these manufacturers. So we started to look for other properties, and for a while we represented the Japanese cartoon Gigantor, and we were picking up properties here and there. And through a miracle, we ended up becoming the licensing agent for Reading Rainbow. That's right, Troma, home of the R-rated, gory, Toxic Avenger, became the licensing and merchandising agent for the Emmy Award-winning PBS series with LeVar Burton, Reading Rainbow. So that, in and of itself, is an amazing accomplishment. And I remember, I had to go up and meet with the show was produced by, in cooperation with Public Broadcasting of Lincoln, Nebraska, and Buffalo, New York, and they're the ones who controlled it. And I had to win them over with some creative ideas of how we would handle it. Because it was a challenge, because even though Reading Rainbow was such a terrific and respected brand, the brand itself really didn't have much IP, because in each show, LeVar Burton would be highlighting various books. So the IP was the books. So there wasn't anything about Reading Rainbow that you could license. So we came to them with some creative ideas of creating some characters and images and things that we could license out, and ended up signing a deal with them. And we did a Reading Rainbow book deal and some other deals for them. And in the process of representing Reading Rainbow, I made a deal with a company here in Florida, where I am now, called Game Tech, to do interactive educational CD-ROMs based on Reading Rainbow. So this was in 1994, 93, 94, which was really when CD-ROM was just emerging. It was just on the cusp of happening. And in the process of that deal, I went down to meet with that company several times to work on that project with them, and really fell in love with what they were doing. Just was fascinated by the whole computer game industry, and I liked the people, and Florida wasn't so bad. At that point, I'd pretty much done everything I could possibly do in Tromaville. So I wrote a letter to the chairman of that company, who I'd spent some time with during my visits, saying that, look, this is who I am, this is what I like, this is what I'm good at. If there's ever an opportunity, I'm very interested in what you guys are doing. I really think the game industry is the future, blah, blah, blah. And, I sent him that letter and heard nothing. And then about 3 or 4 months later, out of the blue, I get a phone call from him. Oh, Jeff, about your letter, And one thing led to another, and an opportunity arose. And I ended up deciding, on very amicable terms, to leave Tromaville and head down to Florida, move my family down to Florida, and take a job directly in the video and computer game industry with this company, Game Tech. And that's what moved me down to Florida. It kind of started the next phase of my career. So it was pretty interesting. And of course, for those of you who are fans of Guardians of the Galaxy, I should mention that when I left Troma in 1994, they hired a kid to replace me. And that kid was James Gunn, who credits Troma for giving him his start in the film industry, And of course, he's gone on to have a phenomenal career. So one could argue, not very successfully, but one could argue that if I hadn't quit Troma, James Gunn, you never know.
I'm with you.
He's a pretty talented guy, and a lot more talented than I could ever imagine being. And I'm sure he would have done just fine with or without me quitting Troma. But makes a good story.
So licensing, way back, I was involved with promotional marketing, and licensing was not a big deal. And I'm talking back in the early 80s. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, licensing companies were coming up and they were just grabbing everything. How easy was it to do licensing back then compared to now?
Well, I think that a lot of it had to do. It was remarkably, it was relatively easy for us to get into it, only because there was a perception that we had a hot property. So, in other words, as I mentioned earlier, that industry wanted the Toxic Crusaders to become the next Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and therefore we were in demand. So I had a much easier entree into that industry than, just some unknown property trying to go out and make deals and meet these people. There was a preconceived notion of what we had, which was very beneficial to us. So I have to be honest and say that. That said, once you make the introductions, it was a wonderful, and is a wonderful industry. And especially back then, many of the leading manufacturers were still, family run businesses that had been through generations. Worms or Pajamas, where, Ed Wormser was running the business that his father or grandfather has started, and that kind of thing. So it was a very warm and friendly industry once you kind of got in there. Um, I don't know, to be honest, if it's as small and intimate today as it was then, because there's been a lot of consolidation and a lot of big corporate players getting involved with Disney gobbling up so many companies and so many properties. So I'm sure it's slightly different than it was then, but the basic structure of a licensing deal I don't think has changed very much, in terms of making minimum guarantees and defining the rights and the exclusivities, and then paying a royalty and the royalty rates. I mean, the basics of the industry I think remain the same, but the players, I'm sure, are a lot different. And of course, there are different aspects to what makes a hot property today than there was then. There it was all based on television. Today, with the internet, with influencers, with YouTube stars and Instagram stars and other places, there are different types of properties that can become popular for licensing than there were then as well. So it's an interesting business, um, and I still occasionally have opportunities to stick my hands back in the waters there, and it was a great experience and a great time for me and for Troma, for sure.
I remember coming home one day. My dad owned a skate manufacturing company up in Canada, and it was called Ruse. It was a high quality, good skate, great skate. Not just because he owned it; they were good. Anyways, he came home and he says he was really ticked off. He's bloody agents, blah 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 blah. He was trying to get Wayne Gretzky. It was Wayne Gretzky's first year in the NHL to sign off on the skates, and he couldn't believe it. The thieves, these guys, these agents, thieves. They wanted $10,000 for Wayne Gretzky to sign the skate. So nowadays, that's a blink of an eye, but back
Yeah.
then, 10,000.
Well, we have, because we had this perceived hot property. I mean, we were being wined and dined, and again, Troma is like, we're a little rinky-dink company, with very little money, low budgets, et cetera, and working out of a 4-story walk-up brownstone on Ninth Avenue in the west side of Manhattan, in Hell's Kitchen, literally. Um, and we were having these big companies come to us and wine and dine us, and we had one licensing agent come in and literally handed us a check for, I think it was either 25 or $50,000, and for Troma at that time, that was a lot of money. And he just literally handed us a check and says, "Here, we don't have a contract or anything, to show you I'm serious. Just here, just take this, keep it, whether you do business with me or not." Obviously, we would never do that, but it was that kind of craziness going on. So we were uh, happy and enamored, but also that's what indicated to us that maybe we should just do this ourselves, because if people are
Right.
throwing money at us, there's something to it. Literally throwing money at
Jeez, why doesn't that ever happen to me?
us.
So now that you've moved down to Florida, you've got Game Tech going.
Yep.
What happens? What happens now in your life?
I joined Game Tech, and that was really kind of my first official sort of marketing role. I've always done marketing as someone who earns a living as a CMO and has always been a marketer. I shouldn't say, but I've never actually taken a marketing class. This is all I became a marketer by doing, and obviously I do read up and educate myself, but I was not trained formally as a marketer. I just became a marketer because it really embodied all the things I like: the creativity, the writing, the performing, all the things that I like. Actually, you can do in marketing, which I really enjoyed. So I joined Game Tech as director of marketing. And that was really my first marketing title. When I was in Troma, I was more involved in production and sales than marketing, although marketing was a lot of what I did. So I've always done marketing, and Game Tech was the first time, and that was sort of on my resume, so to speak. It was an interesting time in games because everything was shifting to CD-ROM, to computer games, et cetera. And the World Wide Web, what I was starting to say, so the web was emerging, and I was a believer because I had these experiences with CompuServe. I had some independent filmmakers we were doing business with, and they worked for a university, so I was communicating with them via email, because in the early days of email, people may not remember or know, it was almost limited to the educational market. Like schools had
Right.
email addresses, and you could only get an edu email address, but through CompuServe, I was able to email them. And so I was doing stuff in email and CompuServe and things, very early on. So when I got to Game Tech, I really believed that the internet was going to be an important part of marketing for games going forward, and that having a website, this was still at the time where not every business had a website. Many businesses and even big brands didn't see the need or didn't think it was anything that was that important. And I lobbied pretty hard. We had a website at Game Tech, and I lobbied really hard that we needed a webmaster. We needed an employee who did nothing but focus on the website. Right now, we had one of our engineers who was just kind of poking around and part-time kind of managing the website. And I saw that there was an opportunity for us to do much more, with demos of our games and things like that. And they weren't on board with that. So when I eventually left Game Tech to join another game company, this time as VP of marketing, part of the appeal of going to this other company was in the interviewing process. I says, I believe we should have a dedicated employee, for the website. And they said, absolutely. They were on board with that. And that was a big decision point for me in agreeing to, leave one entity and go to the other, because they were going to do that, which I believed was really important. So I ended up leaving Game Tech and then joining another game company called Intracorp Entertainment in Miami.
What year was that?
So I left Game Tech and joined Intracorp in 1995.
Wow, so very early in the scheme of things.
Yeah, so in 95, so Intracorp was an interesting company in its own right, because we were the first licensee of the Doom game engine. So we were the first ones, other than id Software, who were licensed to make a first-person shooter using the Doom engine. So for you gamers listening and watching, you I'm sure know exactly what I'm talking about. So we did some great first-person shooter games, including a game called Tech War, which was based on William Shatner's book Tech War. So I ended up getting the opportunity to work very closely with Mr. Shatner, with Bill, Captain Kirk, whatever you want to call him. Again, I was the VP of marketing, so I ended up going on, when we were releasing Tech War, I went on East and West Coast press tours with Bill Shatner. So I traveled, to LA and New York, and was with him as we did appearances on everything from the Howard Stern show to Jay Leno to David Letterman, promoting the game. And it was just a lot of fun and a great experience spending some time and getting to know Captain Kirk. I've got lots of Captain Kirk stories I can share, but he's a terrific guy, very talented, very funny. And it was a real pleasure to have the opportunity to spend that kind of time with him.
And Canadian.
Promoting that game. And Canadian, absolutely.
Yes.
So to bring it back to you facing resistance and creating a website for that game company, how did you feel at the time when you saw this opportunity in a kind of, I guess, an unproven technology at the time, but you seemed certain that you had to do this and you were facing resistance from that one company? Like, what was your thought process there in pushing through that?
It was a long time ago, but I think that, we did have sort of a part-time person paying attention to the website. He was one of our developers and engineers. And so when they wouldn't, commit to having a full-time person, I would just lobby. I became very friendly, even though it was on the marketing side. I became very friendly with the game developers. I played games myself. I understood a little bit of programming. So I tried to be, one of the things I always tried to do is, a lot of companies, there's a big separation between sales, marketing, and product development. And I always felt that that's a triangle that goes together, and all three points of that triangle really need to interact and work closely together. And I tried to be that kind of marketing guy who was very close to the sales team, very close to the development team. And I just basically got that guy to do as much marketing stuff on the website as I could get him to do within the constraints of the time he was allowed to spend, on the website. Because in the game industry, the websites became very important because back then, file sizes and transfers of files were difficult. So getting demos in the hands of customers was very important. And there were demo CDs that were being distributed at stores and stuff. And you might recall that. But we also were trying to get to the point where we can have smaller downloadable demos of games and all that stuff. And of course, the website became a very important distribution point for that information and those demos and things like that. So today it's hard to think back to a time when every company didn't have a website, but there was a time, and it wasn't that long ago in the scheme of things.
No, I remember just being blown away. You'll remember this too, Jeff, using your 1200 baud phone, connecting it. And I think it was probably AOL or something. And all of a sudden you saw these lines going like this, back and forth. 5 minutes later, you had this picture, and you're like, I'm saying to my wife, you got to come down here. There's a picture on my computer. Oh my God, this is going to change the world.
Oh yeah. And in the first time there was multimedia video, even on a CD-ROM, even on a disc, the video was a postage stamp size. I mean, it was literally the size of a postage stamp. And that was the video on your screen. So we've come a long way. It's been really fun and fascinating to watch and enjoy the benefits of all the change as technologies continue to improve and improve and improve and improve. We played LAN games. So today, everyone plays these multiple player games over the internet. You go on Fortnite and you're playing with friends. I play with my grandson who's in Tennessee, and I'm here in Fort Lauderdale, and we play Fortnite together, and it's so easy. Back then there were no games over the World Wide Web. All the network games, if you wanted to play with other players, you had to do it on a local area network. Now, only businesses had local area networks. So it was very common in 1994, 5, 6 for the geeks amongst us, the gamers in a company, to stay after hours and use the company's network to play these networked games, right? That was the only time and place you could do it. There was no such thing as playing over the internet. So it was really funny. You'd have these offices at nights and weekends with all the geeks and gamers in there playing LAN games. And we had William Shatner come to the office and play because we wanted him to experience the Tech War game and what it's like playing the networked version of the game. So he came to his office. He was sitting by someone's desk, and everyone else is at their desk, and we're all playing these networked games in an office. So things have come a long way. But the basic premises and the fun and the strategy behind these games hasn't changed as much as the visuals and the graphics and everything else. It's still the same.
Did he take control of the office like he would on Star Trek?
He was having a blast, and you could hear him. Again, we're all distributed throughout the office in these different offices to play on all the various networked computers. And you could hear him every time he shot someone or did something. He'd scream, "Oh, I got him. Oh, he got me." It was great.
So, Jeff, what happens after Game Tech?
So in Game Tech, gosh, I didn't realize we we're going to be doing this. Jeff Sass, this is your life. Yes. You're going to bring out my third grade teacher in a minute to surprise me?
Oh, just wait.
Hey, just wait. It turns into This Is Your Life.
Okay. So the game industry actually took a turn for the worst back in, around 1997-ish, if I'm getting my dates correctly, but things really crapped out in the game industry, and it was a bad time, and we had to scale down Intracorp dramatically. A lot of the big game distributors went out of business, and they owed us money, and it was a bad time. And so we actually that company ended up filing for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, which was horrible, but also a wonderful experience just from a business standpoint. As an entrepreneur and as a business person, going through that process was in retrospect, a really interesting learning experience. But we had a skeleton staff because Chapter 7 is reorganization. So you're still in business. I mean, Chapter 11 is, we filed Chapter 11. Chapter 7, you're out of business. Chapter 11, you're still in business, but you're scaled down. So we're trying to figure out what could we do. So we had this game engine. We had the Doom, first person shooter engine. And we had this wacky idea, again, way ahead of our time, to do virtual reality real estate walkthroughs using the Doom game engine. So we still had a skeleton staff of 2 or 3 game designers and developers, and we went to some developers in Miami who were building these new developments and convinced them to let us try taking their blueprints and taking their plans and everything and creating it virtually inside a game engine so that the player, the person who wants to look at the home, can actually virtually walk through, just like you would walk through a map in a first-person shooter. They could walk through this home or apartment that hasn't yet been built, and we would map it to all the designs and everything else. And it was really cool. We actually got the name VR Tech. I wish we had held on to that domain name in today's world, but somehow we let it go. But we started kind of a company called VR Tech, using our game technology to do these virtual reality walkthroughs for developers in Miami. And it was a great product, way ahead of its time, but it was a lot of fun. And you could actually get a good sense of what the property was going to be like. And we did a few tests for some developers. And we actually sold, I remember in one case, the first day we set it up in their little trailer on the property where the house was going to be built, they sold a $750,000 home, literally by just the couple who bought it, just going through our game and walking through the house and getting a sense of it. So it was a very effective. Unfortunately, it was very costly to do because we were using game technology. So it cost almost as much as developing a game to develop these walkthroughs. So it wasn't something that the builders or developers, even though it worked, it wasn't something they were willing to pay enough for us to actually do it in any sort of a profitable business fashion. So unfortunately, that didn't really work out. And so that was kind of the end of that business. The biggest challenge is never the technology. The biggest challenge in business is consumer behavior, right? So the technology that we're experiencing today, buying stuff on our phone, doing all that stuff, the technology has existed for a long time. It's only taken until now for consumer behavior to catch up to the point where people are comfortable using that technology. And the challenge of changing consumer behavior is much harder than the challenge of developing new technology. New technology is developed all the time. Getting people to use it, getting people to be comfortable with it, getting it to become mainstream is really the bigger challenge. But it was very interesting. We went public in 1999. We rode that .com wave, through the bust, when the markets crashed in 2000, and then we lived through 9/11. It was a crazy ride. I mean, there's a lot of crazy stories of things that happened, during that ride. But eventually, we had a number of issued patents, scanning barcodes from your phone and all that kind of stuff. And we did sell the company in 2004. And those patents are actually still being used today by a number of big companies, because they're underlying a lot of the things we're doing today. So it was interesting. It was a very interesting run. We grew the company from we went public with 2 employees, and then grew to 89 employees at our peak. And then, of course, had to scale down when the world came crashing down. And very interesting ride, but learned a great deal. It was a great experience.
People talk about entrepreneurs and risk takers, but there's a lot of different types of entrepreneurs, and one of them are what you're describing, the innovator. And when you have to be that entrepreneur who is that risk taker, launching something and then having to change people's attitudes on how to buy or what to buy, that is a scary process. And there's very few. It's tough. And everything that you've been talking about is interesting because you've got this bug. I hate to tell you, but you've taken the hardest route, because everything that you're getting involved with, it's before it's time. So it's really tough. Like, how do you deal with that? Bringing out a product and knowing, oh, I just lived this experience Is it getting the right one? Is it just doing it until you hit the home run? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's hard, and I don't know. I don't know. Arguably, I don't know if I've done it well because I keep moving from one thing to another, from one industry to another. So in my career, I've been in entertainment, I've been in technology, I've been in e-commerce, and this and that. But I like that, to be honest. To me, and again, going back to what I said earlier, for me personally, I've always managed in all of those moves in all of those industries. I've always managed to focus on the things that I really enjoy doing. So I love to write. I've always been a writer since I was a kid. As a marketer, I get to write almost every day, whether I'm writing marketing copy or press releases or even, writing emails that resonate with the message I want them to resonate with. I get to write. And of course, on the side, I was able to write a book. So you get to do stuff. I love to perform. As a kid, it was acting. I studied acting in college. I do a lot of speaking. We talked at the beginning about being on stage with Norm. I've been very fortunate in my career to always have the opportunity to be the one at the company to make the presentations, to go on stage, to speak at conferences. So I get my performance bug fed, through that. So that's why for me, I love marketing so much because it's been the one thing across any industry that I can still satisfy myself with the things I'm really passionate about doing, that I really enjoy doing, and I think that I do well. Um, so that's one way to get around it.
It sounds like the products or the companies you've been involved with, if if you would have been able to launch them 10 years later, it would have been a whole different story, you know?
I do believe that, what's exciting to me about a long and winding career, and I think that as we all age, we learn this and understand this better. And Steve Jobs even, said something along the lines of, you can connect the dots. It's easy to connect the dots afterwards. And I think when you look back at a career, you can connect the dots and you can see how everything you've done, no matter which way you turned, positive and negative, has contributed in some way to where you are today. And that's kind of what's exciting about life's journey in general, and a business journey specifically, is really seeing how you take every step and everything you learn along the way. I worked for Troma for 7.5 years, 20 some odd years ago, yet I can today look at things that I learned and experienced there that I've been able to apply to virtually every company I've worked for since. And I wrote a book about that. There are no wrong steps we take in this crazy journey. It's really recognizing what we can learn from each of those steps and how we can apply it to the next step. And to me, that's what makes it fun and exciting and interesting.
Hey there, guys and gals. This is Hayden Farrar, the producer of I Know This Guy. Thanks so much for listening to part 1 of our interview with Jeff Sass. Make sure to tune in next time where Jeff gives us tips from his book, Everything I Know About Business and Marketing I Learned from the Toxic Avenger. There's some great stories and tips that you can relate to your life and to your business, so make sure to check it out. And before I forget, make sure to subscribe, like, and review the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps us grow this show and reach a wider audience. Thanks, guys and gals. See you next time.